Has Ramsdale been replaced by Raya, or was he merely rested? During the club's pre-season tour of the United States, Arteta spoke of his desire to make Arsenal more unpredictable. Last season he made the fewest changes of any Premier League manager. Whilst opponents couldn't always stop Arsenal, they certainly knew what to expect. He'd clearly given a great deal of thought over the summer to how he could mix things up this season. The signing of Kai Havertz, an apparently opportunistic signing who spent 3 underwhelming seasons at Chelsea playing across the front line for 3 different managers who all seemed to have a different idea as to his best position, seemed a clear step towards this unpredictability. Particularly as he'd seemingly been signed not as an attacker but rather as a midfielder, a position in which he'd not been employed in his time at Chelsea, at least not often. The addition of Declan Rice seemed far more clear-cut. We needed to strengthen our defensive midfield, particularly to shield our left-hand side of defence, and that was exactly the position that Rice was best suited to. Although even there it was beginning to look like he might have been brought in as more of a box-to-box midfielder, closer to the role filled by outgoing Granit Xhaka, who'd played so successfully there in his last season with us. Then in came Timber, another hugely versatile player from Ajax who, in keeping with that club's philosophy of total football, could play either at right back or at centre back, and that prompted many to ask if Ben White would be losing his place, even though he'd had such a good season. In pre-season though, we saw him in the inverted left-back position due to the absence of Zinchenko through injury. Indeed, he played so well there that it was now looking more like the Ukrainian might be left out. Despite these incoming players and the questions around them, it wasn't until the first game of the season that we really saw just how unpredictable Arteta was planning to be. Out went last season's regular left-sided centre-back and one of the team's most consistent and dependable players. Gabriel, who'd not missed a single league game in a campaign. When the lineup for that home game against Nottingham Forest was announced, it seemed that Mikel had decided to play Partey in a right-back role. Of course, as the game unfolded, it was clear that he'd instead chosen to play a 3-5-2. Presumably because he knew that Forest would be happy for us to have possession mostly in their half. Despite winning comfortably, the game itself wasn't what we'd hoped, and there was a disjointedness about our build-up. Some fans started to speculate that these changes had all been brought about in order to accommodate Havertz, overlooking the fact that he was almost a like-for-like replacement for Xhaka. In the 82nd minute, Forest scored after a breakaway down our right, which many pointed out was a result of Partey playing out of position, but probably owed more to the 2 centre-backs not quite being up to the pace of the new season. Following the game, there was another surprise with the signing of David Raya. This had not been expected, even though Arteta had been known to be a fan and previously tried to sign him before Ramsdale was brought in. Raya, who'd worked with our own goalkeeping coach Inaki Kana while they were both at Brentford, had been one of the standout goalkeepers of the previous season in the Premier League. But Ramsdale had also had a great season and was seen as a vital part of that back line and had already established himself as a fan's favourite. It is the accepted wisdom that a club, even a very good one challenging for the title, cannot have 2 good goalkeepers. Arsenal throughout its illustrious history has never had 2 first-team keepers. There's always been a first choice and a backup. With the Euros coming up and Raya as keen to get minutes in order to stake a claim for the starting berth between the sticks for Spain as Ramsdale was to claim the England number 1 shirt, this felt like a strange move for him. Made even stranger by the fact that he'd refused to sign for Tottenham, who'd offered considerably more money for him and had a more obvious need of a goalkeeper. The obvious inference was that he'd been made promises about game time. True, Arsenal's involvement in the Champions League could mean more games, but then only if successful in the group stages. Could it really be that he would be happy only to play in cup games and let Ramsdale continue in the league? Arteta said he wanted the highest level of competition for every area of the pitch. When asked about the signing of a top goalkeeper to presumably challenge his position as number 1, Ramsdale was typically cavalier, saying, "Bring it on." He pointed out that he'd done the same when he came to the club. He was confident he would rise to the challenge. He went on to keep a clean sheet against Crystal Palace, helping Arsenal to claim the 3 points, having only scored once and down to 10 men for nearly 30 minutes after the sending off of Tomiyasu. He made 2 saves and was steady if unspectacular, although on the night his distribution was not what it should have been. Still, it seemed that the goalkeeper position was his to lose, and Raya would still have to wait until his performances dipped. Ramsdale was back in goal for the visit of Fulham to the Emirates, and within the first minute, a careless back pass from Saka with Partey and White both in midfield led to a run on goal by Pereira, whose decision to shoot from distance caught Ramsdale scrambling back and out of position. Arsenal had, for the 3rd time in a calendar year, conceded a goal at home in the first minute. Most didn't blame Ramsdale for this goal, but it does make an unusual decision to run towards his left rather than squaring up to the runner. Fulham's late equaliser in the game came from a corner which Ramsdale could do little about, and he kept his place for the visit of Man United. In that game, Rashford's opener after a careless pass from Havertz was a beautiful finish that few would have been able to stop, and after a late scare where Garnacho seemed to have won the game for United, slotting past Ramsdale with ease from outside his area, it was ruled out for offside, and two late goals from Rice and Jesus sealed all 3 points. Arsenal headed into the international break with few really discussing the possibility of a change in goal. Ramsdale even secured his 4th cap for England against Scotland, and although he failed to keep a clean sheet, conceding to goal machine Harry Maguire's beautifully taken own goal, most felt he played well and might well have established himself as England's new first choice. And just as it looked as though Raya would have to content himself with cup football, Arteta surprised us all by dropping Ramsdale in favour of Raya for the trip to Everton. A game Arsenal had failed to win for the past 6 years and had taken on even greater significance with Manchester City winning their first 5 games in a row, as well as Spurs moving ahead of us with a last gasp winner at Sheffield United. So was this a sign that Arteta now saw the Spaniard as his number one? Did he feel that Ramsdale was less likely to keep a clean sheet? The game itself was arguably Arsenal's best so far this season, a hugely convincing domination of an abject Everton who were able to muster only one shot on target. Raya had very little to do, but his distribution was better, he dealt with crosses well, and he seemed comfortable in the back 5. After the game, when asked about his decision to make the change in advance of the first game in the Champions League just 3 days later, Arteta spoke about how he was a young manager who was still learning, but that he had 2 regrets. In 2 games previously, he'd felt he should bring on a keeper, but decided against it. This had led him to question the accepted wisdom of never changing the keeper. After all the other positions are up for change. So is Arteta a genius, someone who challenges the received wisdoms and is on the cusp of innovation, changing forever how we see goalkeepers' role in the team? Will he be a pioneer of the idea of different keepers for different games? Something that's not been widely tried, but is an interesting question that he's asking. Why is it okay to change all the other positions but not the keeper? Well, there is a difference, isn't there, between outfield players, even ones that play in the same role. Tomiyasu, for example, is not the same option as Zinchenko. One is stronger, better at winning aerial duels and more defensively minded, less likely to roam into midfield and less able to find a defence-splitting through ball. Jesus offers something completely different to Eddie Nketiah, and at certain points of a game, or against different opposition, it's not hard to see where you might choose one over the other. Surely that's not the case with keepers. You presumably always want them to be good at collecting crosses, stopping shots, commanding their area. You may favour a player who's good with his feet, as increasingly the case in football, but not at the expense of any of these other areas. What type of game would you favour Ramsdale over Raya? It seems that Raya is in fact the better keeper all round. It's not clear where Ramsdale is better. This is the real issue. Despite Arteta possibly being right that keepers should be subject to change as with outfield players, when it comes to the big matches, you want your best keeper in goal. Is this talk about a different attitude to competition for every place a smokescreen for the fact that he has more confidence in his new keeper? Perhaps Arteta genuinely feels that he can rotate frequently through the season without any problems. Perhaps you'll find, as managers have presumably found before, that there is a difference when it comes to keepers. For one, it's not clear how you can know whether a keeper is in form or not, when as in the Everton game, they often have so little to do. I like that he's challenging the preconceived notions and is prepared to be ruthless, to try new ideas, but what cost does this have? Surely Ramsdale cannot help but be upset at losing his place without having done anything wrong. If Arteta is just rotating, when can we expect to see Rambo again? The Champions League game? The derby next Sunday? Who's better suited to a high-intensity game like that one? Would it ever make sense to bring in a player who's only had one previous league game under his belt for you before the visit of Spurs? When keepers make mistakes, it's far more costly, and so the decision to change carries far more risk. If Arteta is prepared to take that risk, then perhaps he'll go down as a trendsetter when we win trophies. Perhaps, as he alluded to, we may see one keeper subbed for another in-game, something that is uncommon wherever football is played. I'm not inclined to doubt how sincerely he meant what he said. I believe he does feel that the best squad should have at least 2 players in every position. But if I were a little bit more conspiracy-minded or inclined toward intrigue, I would suggest that all of this is PR for the fact that he feels he has upgraded the keeper position. And if Raya is good as he believes him to be, then Arsenal have a new number one. But I guess time will tell.